coming up. We haven't talked much Eagles. The Sixers have dominated the conversation for most of this week. But the Eagles are in a big game. Now, this is a game when we looked at the schedule and said, oh, it's weakening up a little bit. But this is a game that we go, I don't know about this one. And then the Bengals got off to a bad start, and then they're rallying. So for the lowdown on what the Eagles face this Sunday, let's bring in the man who covers the Bengals for ESPN.com on the Comcast Business Hotline, Ben Baby. Ben, how you doing today?
Good. How are y'all doing?
Fantastic. All right, now tell us about this team because they started off bad to the point where you go, well, I don't know, now it's going to be a climb for this team to make the playoffs when they were absolutely supposed to make the playoffs. They've won 2 in a row. They're 3-4, but they've only beaten the Giants, Browns, and Carolina with that overtime loss to the Ravens thrown in there. So that's a big get for them. What are they right now?
Yeah, I think they understand that this weekend's going to be big. And I talked to Bengals defensive end Sam Hubbard earlier in the week, and he said basically if we want to find out if we're going to be contenders, this is the kind of game that they've got to win. The Bengals have been unable to put a complete game together this season. Usually you'll have the offense playing well or the defense playing poorly, and then vice versa. Really, the last couple of weeks, the offense hasn't been able to find the points that they had earlier in the season when everything was clicking. But the defense has played better. Now the caveat is that they played a Browns team that had Deshaun Watson as the starting quarterback and then eventually went to option number 3 in Jameis Winston and DTR, and then the Giants who benched Daniel Jones a week after the Bengals played him. So, we'll see how much more of a challenge the Eagles can bring. I think my big question is where are the Eagles at because of all the uncertainty and kind of the way they ended last year. I've always been a little skeptical of how they were going to look this season. So I'm very curious to see how this is going to play out.
Yeah, this is going to be a big test game for both teams. So when we look at the Bengals, listen, they came into the season supposedly as one of the premier teams in this league and got off to a dreadful start. What was that all about?
Yeah, I think a lot of that had to do with, I think some of it had to do with Burrow really trying to figure out where he was at coming off the wrist injury. I didn't think he was particularly great in camp and didn't look good in that game against New England, which remains New England's only win of the year. And so that's definitely a big aspect. That's a game that shouldn't have dropped in hindsight, even with Burrow trying to find his footing. But then, you go out, you lose games, you blow leads to Kansas City and Baltimore, 2 very winnable games at the position they were in. And I think that's kind of the situation where they were at, and that goes to why they didn't play well, and then they had some injuries on the defensive line. So they believe they're turning the corner, but I think Sunday we'll really find out where they're at.
Talking to Ben Baby, he covers the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN.com. Now, Ben, their defense, pretty pedestrian. They're ranked 20th, 21st against the rush. But their offense is pretty ranked 10th in the league. But they're going to have to pass it and not run it to get most of their strength from that. So is this a game that they're going to have to outscore the Eagles?
It's funny. Joe Burrow has talked about the fact that when they had their offense was clicking, we were 1-4 and really weren't winning a ton. And I think for them, they've got to find a way to, their defense is really what brings this whole thing together. They've got to find a way to make sure that Saquon Barkley doesn't beat you on the ground, and then find a way to contain the receivers. And the Bengals have a lot of high praise for Devontae Smith. Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach, said he's always appreciated how much of a competitor he was, and that maybe offset some of the size concerns that were surrounding Devontae going into the draft. And then, they have a lot of respect for Lane Johnson, is one of the top pass protectors in the league. And I think as they go through the week, their game plan is going to be predicated defensively around how to make sure they can get pressure and put their guys in good matchups so Lane just doesn't dominate things. So I think that, when you look at it, I think that the defense is really going to have to figure out a way to keep the Eagles at bay and just give the offense the time it needs to figure things out, because it hasn't clicked like it probably should have these last couple of weeks.
So I assume the Eagles now, after what they did last week, the Barkley thing is pretty much a strength for them that they're going to still ride. So the defensive game plan is to stop Barkley and just dare Jalen Hurts to beat him?
Yeah, I think that normally that's when you look at where this team has been successful. I think that when you have a team with a great running back, like when the Bengals have faced Derrick Henry in the past, when they played the Ravens, they are okay if you beat them through the air. What they will not have is you just get big gains and gash them on the ground, and that really takes a toll on that group. So I think that will be the key. See if you can trust your corners to make plays. See if you can get the pass rush to get home, and then see if you can get that run game bottled up and make the Eagles one-dimensional.
Ben, speaking of the pass rush, the Philadelphia Eagles really got theirs going the last 2 weeks, 13 sacks in 2 weeks. How have the Bengals been along that offensive line? I saw Orlando Brown, their left tackle, missed practice. You got the rookie Amarius Mims at the right tackle position. How's that matchup going to look this weekend?
Yeah, I think it's crazy to say because of how bad the Bengals have been on the offensive line in their time, or in Joe Burrow's time here. But I kind of favor the Bengals in this matchup because I think this offensive line might be the best that Burrow has had. Orlando was limited at practice yesterday. I think it was a good sign that he was out there. I expect him to be a little bit better and probably increase his workload as he goes through the week. And Amarius Mims has been really impressive as a rookie. For him to come in and, he was slotted as the starter, as a first-round pick going into the season before he injured his pectoral. And then when Trent Brown got hurt, he slid right back in and has done really well, has earned a lot of praise. And so I think that you've never seen Burrow have more time to throw. And so I do favor this matchup, for the Bengals on that side of the ball.
All right, so we're talking about a 2.5 line, 2.5 point line, Bengals favored, which is a tad less than the normal home field advantage. But you like the Bengals in this game. And they're almost in a must-win situation, let's face it.
Yeah, I don't feel great about taking Cincinnati in this one just because I think it's just going to be, that Eagles offense, if that can get clicking, I think that's going to be, with the resources they have. I followed Jalen since, I covered high school ball in Texas, and he was at Channelview, and then covered him a few times when he was playing at Alabama. I've really been a fan of his for a long time. Glad to see that it's worked out well, and the receivers and kind of how they built that offense, really unique. And I think it's just a good way to surround your quarterback with a lot of good receivers. The Bengals, have currently had that situation, but for how much longer, we'll see. But I think one of the reasons I like Cincy in this is by and large, when I've seen Philly, I just have not been overly convinced that they're the team that we've seen in previous years when they've been conference contenders in the NFC. And, just the way they ended last season, the way they've looked at times this year, that gives me some pause. And so, we'll see what Eagles team shows up on Sunday. And that's kind of why I'm leaning slightly towards Cincinnati.
All right, Ben, let's talk about the quarterback. You mentioned Joe Burrow coming back from that wrist injury. Burrow usually gets talked about as being one of the top 5 to 7 quarterbacks in the NFL. And Cincinnati, you guys certainly felt like that when he first came out. What's the feeling around Joe Burrow these days? Do people still believe in Cincinnati that this guy is one of the premier quarterbacks in the NFL?
It's funny. I was talking to him. Joe went on an analytics rant yesterday saying I don't really know what goes into the analytics. And I talked to him on the side, and it was like, this kind of, was kind of what EPA does, what QBR does. And, oh, by the way, our QBR metrics at ESPN, they've got you as having the best year of your career right now. And when you look at the numbers, Joe is playing at a really high level, as good as he's played when he's been healthy. And I think that's always been the caveat when you talk about how Joe Burrow is viewed around the league. It's when he's been healthy, he's been really good and can make a lot of, make the throws he needs and just really has a great command of the offense. And as, I guess when he first came back after there was a lot of question marks over how the wrist was going to look. And then as he's continued through the middle of the season, really looks good. And now he's kind of hit a lull again. And they faced pretty good defenses, especially with the Giants. I think a really good defensive front led by Dexter Lawrence, and interior rushers have always given the Bengals a ton of problems, and so has Myles Garrett. And that Cleveland defense is also just really strong. And so I understand where they're at on that side, but this should be a matchup where he should be able to find T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and that run game should be able to pop off a couple of big runs just to give them some breathing room.
All right, sounds good. Ben Baby, thank you for coming on. We appreciate it. So your pick, you'll take Bengals what, 25-21, right?
I would go 24-21.
All right, 24-21. That's okay. That's okay, bud. Thanks, Ben. We appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate
Thanks for coming on. It's Ben Baby.